Let's discuss with MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard and Rick Stengel, former Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. So, Vaughn, bring us the latest out of these talks. What's the White House saying about progress?
The White House isn't saying much. And truly, it's usually the Omanis or the Iranians that we are waiting for in terms of the readouts from these meetings. Of course, that is very atypical. Usually, presidential administrations try to be at the forefront of communicating these messaging. I think it's important that these remain indirect talks. And there is a lot of skepticism still, especially on the Iranian side, about the extent to which the U.S. is truly committed to these talks coming after in June when those talks were moving forward with Steve Witkoff, and Israel moved forward with their strikes on Iran, followed by the intent to take out those 3 nuclear facilities by U.S. forces. And so there's still a lot of skepticism, especially as we continue to hear directly from President Trump threatening to move forward with military action. And I want to let you listen to Secretary Marco Rubio overnight here laying out very clearly that there is not active nuclear enrichment taking place in Iran, which only further questions why move forward under these circumstances. Take a listen.
I think it's pretty clear that they have not abandoned their desire to enrich again. They have not abandoned that. In fact, they publicly insisted that they have the right to do so. I won't comment on the intelligence picture, but I could tell you that there's reason to believe that they, given the opportunity, will return to enrichment one day. They've been set back because it's been, but they can. Well, if they try to rebuild it, we'll have to address it, and because that was made clear to them.
Now, the administration has suggested that a red line is an agreement by the Iranians to zero nuclear enrichment. At the same time, the Omani foreign minister here just in the last few minutes saying that they have been exchanging creative and positive ideas in Geneva today. They're currently on a break, but are reconvening this afternoon for more talks.
Creative and positive ideas leads me to this question, Rick. Ahead of today's talks, we had some reporting that a senior diplomat was telling us that there was a major package of economic opportunities for the U.S. that perhaps Iran was going to be presenting today that would be specifically directed at the president, including oil and gas, mining rights, and critical minerals. I guess, what do you make of that approach by Iran? Could it work to sort of take some of the pressure off?
Yes. The Iranians are shrewd negotiators. I was involved in the Obama's negotiation with JCPOA back in the day. And the Iranians have looked at what motivates Trump. I mean, part of the problem and the reason there's skepticism is there's no mission. It's not clear. Is this just degrade their nuclear power? Is it to help the protesters? Is it to help Israel get rid of ballistic missiles? But the Iranians are shrewd enough to know that every deal that Trump has made has always had some economic self-interest for the president or his cronies or his family. So they're negotiating that. It's a bazaar for them. They know how to do that. So, but I do think it's a difficult negotiation, in part because this would be a war of choice for the U.S., not a war of necessity. Marco Rubio says they're not enriching uranium. What's the problem? You know, Trump obviously exaggerated when he said that he obliterated their facilities. Mr. Witkoff said they were a week away. They're both wrong. So I really would love to be to some definition of what they're trying to accomplish here.
To your point, I mean, when we heard the president say we've obliterated their facilities, but now is saying we may need to bomb again, is it possible that Iran could have just been that quick to kind of rebuild? Or is that an acknowledgement that perhaps the initial strikes the U.S. didn't destroy everything?
Well, as Marco Rubio said, which I completely agree with, Iran has never wanted to relinquish its desire to have a nuclear weapon. At the same time, every American president has said the same thing that Donald Trump says, which we cannot let Iran get a nuclear weapon. The question is how to get there. You know, I look at those negotiators there, and I remember back in the day, our negotiator was Ernest Moniz, the Secretary of the Treasury, a nuclear physicist. There's 2 real estate guys there, you know, negotiating with them, and they're trying to get a deal that they think will please their boss. That's not necessarily the best way to go.
Vaughn, Senator Tim Kaine serves on the Armed Services Committee. He talked to us here at MS Now about his concerns regarding the administration's strategy. Let's listen.
The president hadn't made the case to the American public, and they don't have a clear objective. It's to stop a nuclear program. Wait a minute. President Trump said it was obliterated 6 months ago. It's to protect protesters, wait a minute, the Trump administration is deporting Iranians back into Iran, including Iranian Christians, where they'll be persecuted there. They don't care about how Iranians are treated. Wait a minute, it's for other reasons, to change the regime, etc. They don't have a clear objective.
Vaughn, is there a White House strategy here? And is the White House preparing to make the case to the American people about why we may be on the verge of war with Iran?
There is no indication, and the President of the United States had an opportunity in his State of the Union address to do that, and he did not do that. And I have asked White House officials repeatedly, what are they telling the Iranians the red lines are? What are they negotiating around? And they have not provided that, not only to journalists, but also to the American public. And let's also be very clear about this. This is a conversation we literally had 8-9 months ago. Tulsi Gabbard had testified on Capitol Hill that Iran was a long ways away from reaching the capacity to build a nuclear weapon. Then ultimately, days later, I asked the President of the United States directly about the claim by Tulsi Gabbard, his Director of National Intelligence, and he told me she was wrong. And what do we have? Just the other day, Steve Witkoff saying that, quote, Iran is now close to being a week away from an industrial-grade bomb-making material. Other White House officials are saying, no, that's not the case. Right. So the stakes of this are so high here, and Democrats are calling into question, are they going to present this, or are they going to move forward with military action without any sort of congressional approval or public buy-in?
The facts aren't clear. It's hard to know who or what to trust. Thank you, Vaughn Hilliard. Rick Stengel will keep asking questions. Appreciate it.